In 1974, Hammer Films released their attempt to have a swashbuckling action hero for a vampire killer. It's Captain Kronos, Vampire Hunter.
Who is he? Your master?
The K stands for Kronos.
Captain Kronos.
Vampire Killer!
What's going on, my friends? Welcome again to the Cobweb channel. My name is Daniel, and I guess you could say this video is really sponsored by Hammer Films because they just restored and released a 4K restoration of Captain Kronos, Vampire Hunter in this really fancy big box release, and they were nice enough to send it to me for review. So this thing is available to purchase now. Thank you very much to Hammer for sending this to me. But this isn't going to be an unboxing video. I actually already did that in a haul video just recently. You can check that out on the channel. And this isn't really going to be a 4K review because that's not really what I do on this channel, although the picture quality will come up. This is going to be what I usually do for Hammer Films, which is a deep dive review of the entire film itself. Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter was filmed in 1972, but didn't actually get released until 1974. And it's the only film to ever be directed by Brian Clemens. He was actually a very prolific producer and screenwriter. He was instrumental in the TV show The Avengers, and for Hammer themselves, he wrote Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde, which is probably my second favorite film of theirs from the 70s. And this film came at a good time for Hammer. They were kind of trying to change their image, try to appeal more to the kids at the time. They didn't end up doing a very good job because their company would kind of go under not too long after this. But Brian Clemens really wanted to make a vampire film for Hammer that changed up the formula. He watched a lot of their vampire films and he thought they were very samey. It was kind of the same plot over and over again, and he wanted to do something different. So he took the vampire lore in a very different direction, and instead of putting all of the focus on the villain, like Christopher Lee as Dracula, he wanted to put that focus on the hero. So he created a swashbuckling action hero to lead his vampire film, Captain Kronos. It's a period film taking place around 1600, and we kick right off with a POV vampire attack sequence out in the woods where a vampire is stalking a couple of girls, and after one of them is left alone and the other one joins up with her, we discover she has been attacked by the vampire and turned old. Yes, this is a different kind of vampire film. The monster isn't sucking blood, it's sucking life itself, youth, kind of like Tobe Hooper's Life Force. At least her hair didn't age. Now we're launching into our title card, and it's a really cool one with some cool music as well. I love that Captain Kronos gets his own logo. That's awesome. His coat that he wears like a cape is so badass, and he actually uses a katana, not just a regular sword, it's a samurai sword. Captain Kronos is played by Horst Janssen, a German actor who actually just passed away, so rest in peace, sir. Horst Janssen, in the physical performance, did a great job. He's got a great look for this character, a badass vampire hunter, and he did all of his own stunts, so it's a fantastic physical performance. But unfortunately, he is dubbed.
Marcus!
He's dubbed over with an actor named Julian Holloway. This was actually not what director Brian Clemens wanted, and he kind of fought against it, but later in life he regretted not fighting against it more. But the producers decided that Horst Janssen's German accent was just a little bit too thick. I wish this wasn't the case. It's a decent dub, but there's a disconnect here. What we really need from Captain Kronos is charisma. We need him to like blow us away like an Errol Flynn swashbuckler. And he almost gets there, but I just think the dub, it creates a disconnect, and the charisma can't get there all the way because of it.
Never rush into a battle unprepared. Remember, the war taught us that, if nothing else.
As Kronos is riding through a village, we're introduced to our next main character, and it's Caroline Monroe as Carla, a gypsy girl who got locked in the stocks for dancing on Sundays.
And what crime have you committed?
I danced on a Sunday.
It's like the town from Footloose in here, and Captain Kronos is not about it. He is pro dancing on Sundays, so he slashes his sword to free her, and she immediately wants to ride off with him. She wants the heck out of this town. And I gotta say, I really like the rural atmosphere of this movie. One thing that threw me off about it the first time I saw it is it's not really a gothic horror film. It's kind of more folk horror in terms of its aesthetic. It looks a little closer to Blood on Satan's Claw than Horror of Dracula. But to speak about how the movie looks, the first couple of times I saw this movie, I was not as big a fan of it as I was on this watch. And one of the reasons is I've always found it to be a very drab looking movie, just dull colors, flat lighting, just nowhere near as vibrant as so many of the other Hammer films. That's what I always thought when I was watching it on this Scream Factory Blu-ray. But I gotta say, after checking it out on 4K, it looks so much better. Like, it's crazy. I'm no 4K expert. That's why I don't really do 4K reviews, but I can tell you the movie looks much better on 4K. It is so much more of a colorful, it's not a super colorful movie, but it's more of a vibrant, colorful film. And I appreciated the atmosphere so much more on this go around. So Kronos, Carla, and also Professor Grost, who is played by John Cater, not John Carter, John Cater, all roll into town. Professor Grost is like Captain Kronos's helper, sidekick, friend, really a hunchback character who's a terrific character in this movie. I really like him. And they're meeting up with an old friend of Kronos, Dr. Marcus, played by John Carson. I really like John Carson in Hammer films, particularly in Plague of the Zombies, where he played the evil voodoo-using squire who's turning people into zombies. So good in that movie. So good here. He is so likable, and you immediately buy into Kronos and Marcus's friendship right from the start. And it turns out Marcus has called in Kronos because Captain Kronos is a professional vampire hunter, and he's got a feeling there's some vampire happenings in his town as more and more young girls are suddenly becoming old women. Like this really cool scene where a girl is attacked by a vampire while in a church and a shadow of the cross starts to move. Creepy stuff.
What he doesn't know about vampirism wouldn't fill a flea's codpiece.
And this is where they come to the conclusion that these are vampires of youth, not of blood, which first time I saw this movie, that kind of threw me off and disappointed me because I thought the character of Captain Kronos was so cool. This badass vampire hunter, I wanted to see him go up against true vampires, and these vampires are different, and I kind of wanted something more traditional. Like, can you imagine Captain Kronos going up against Christopher Lee Dracula? But really, that's a fault of this movie never getting sequels like it was intended to. It never ended up happening because it came out like right at the end of Hammer's viability as a studio, and it wasn't that successful anyway. But just looking at this movie on its own, I respect that they did something different. Like I said at the beginning, Brian Clemens thought that Hammer vampire movies were way too samey. He wanted to switch things up, and he very much did. And it allows for some unexpected twists throughout the movie that you probably wouldn't get if we knew what was coming because it was a traditional vampire movie. And then we get this great moment out here where Kronos and Carla confirm that, yeah, they definitely want to get it on.
If you'll have me.
Oh, I'll have you.
As I'm sure you know, Caroline Monroe is an iconic cult horror actress of primarily the 70s and 80s, but even beyond. This was actually her first leading role. She's really good in this. I'd have to say my favorite Caroline Monroe is in The Golden Voyage of Sinbad. That is such a fun adventure monster movie, and she's great in it. Director Brian Clemens actually wrote that one too and was instrumental in getting her cast in that. But I love her in this movie. I think Carla is a really fun character. Certainly not a deep character, although practically nobody here is. And you can say that, yes, she is there to be eye candy, which she does very well. And she's there for Captain Kronos to be like James Bond, to have a woman, to have some sex scenes. She's just a really fun-loving young woman who wanted to get out of her boring, prudish town that won't let you dance on Sundays. And she wants to ride off on a crazy adventure with these guys and with this super handsome dude, Captain Kronos. I think that's fun. I think she's a really fun character. Next character we're introduced to is Shane Bryant as Paul Derwood. Shane Bryant actually did several Hammer films, including Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell. And it turns out he is the son of a very rich family, and the father had just recently passed away. And the mother is now overcome with grief and is aged greatly. Oh my gosh, that's what the mother looks like? That's creepy. That doesn't even look like a real person. In another interesting piece of vampire lore, now Kronos and Grost are burying toads in boxes because of an old folk rhyme that says,
If a vampire should be strode close to the grave of a dead toad, then the vampire life shall give. and suddenly the toad shall live.
I just kind of like weird little folklore like that in my vampire movies, so I enjoy that.
It's an old folk rhyme, and like most of them, there's a grain of truth in it.
And with Carla going into Kronos' barn/sleeping chamber, the boys know they need to make themselves scarce because it's sexy time. There's actually no nudity in this movie because of some very strategic lighting. Carla Monroe throughout her career really never wanted to do nudity, and I don't think she ever did it. So she was able to get out of it in certain ways. Here she used tape to actually tape her hair to her breast. She wore like a skin-colored underwear suit, so she was cool with that, and the filmmakers got some at least suggested nudity. After this weird attacking makeout scene, we get our next victim. This is actually a cool moment where this guy actually watches it happen and runs up and finds his girlfriend now looks old. That's a confirmation. These women aren't just aging quickly. There's a youth vampire around. And in our guest star role, we've got Ian Hendry in this random pub. You probably recognize Ian Hendry from Amicus's Tales from the Crypt or Theater of Blood with Vincent Price. But he's playing the local alpha male douchebag, which Ian Hendry seems like kind of a weird choice for, but he totally pulls it off. And he acts like I usually do when I tell stupid jokes on this channel.
You're not laughing. Laugh, I'm telling you. Laugh.
We'll probably come back to him at some point, but it's time for John Carson to do some investigating on the Derwoods, the rich people.
Witchcraft and necromancy. The book.
Yeah, if somebody's got that book on their coffee table, they're probably pretty cool, and they should subscribe to the Cobwebs channel. And we meet his sister, Sarah, played by Lois Dane. Now, right from the start, even though she's frequently described as very beautiful here, and you know, she is, I'm not saying she's unattractive, but she looks different than we might expect from a woman in this time period. And that's because Brian Clemens decided that this actress just didn't look good in the dresses of the time period because she was too thin. So they just put her in men's clothes. She had short hair. He didn't want to put a wig on her. He thinks wigs can impede someone's performance, which I respect because 70s Hammer films are rife with bad wigs. So that's kind of a bullet dodged. But it makes these two kind of an interesting androgynous pair. I mean, Shane Bryant is already kind of an androgynous looking guy. And then you've got her with her short hair and men's clothing. They're kind of this genderless duo, which is interesting. And Brian Clemens talks on the commentary about how his idea for them is that they're incestuous. So there you go.
Mother, you wanted me?
Okay, what is going on with their mother? She does not look real at all. Her mouth's not moving when she's talking. Could they not get an old woman to play this role? Okay. Ian Hendry's coming back because Captain Kronos and Grost are coming into this pub. And this is where we're really getting like a Western moment. It feels very influenced by spaghetti Westerns for reasons you're about to see. And Brian Clemens actually considered John Ford's Westerns a big inspiration on this movie. He considered it like a vampire Western and not really a horror movie. It's actually really funny when you listen to directors talk about horror movies they've made. It's so common that they don't consider their movie to be a horror movie. Like if we only considered horror movies to be what the directors thought were horror movies, there'd be so few horror movies. It's like ridiculously common. But I do love the trope in Westerns of the pompous small town a-hole antagonizing our hero at the local pub. And then our hero's got to make an example of him. And this is where we get our Clint Eastwood moment. Where Captain Kronos just has one rapid quick stroke of the sword and kills all three of these guys immediately. Exactly like Clint Eastwood with a gun and a fistful of dollars. Such a cool moment. And I also like the attention to defending Professor Grost because Grost really was upset by the fact that these guys were making fun of him, which is what immediately kicked this thing off.
They made sport of me, Kronos. They laughed at me.
Am I so terribly ugly to provoke such mockery?
And Kronos is very serious about defending him. It really just shows their genuine friendship. It's nice.
Your body was given to you by God. Just remember that.
Whoa. Is he snorting cocaine right now? Actually, it wouldn't surprise me because Captain Kronos is smoking pot through this whole movie. I didn't even realize it was pot when I was watching it before, but listening to Brian Clemens on the commentary, Kronos is smoking pot. This is an interesting moment. This girl gets attacked by a vampire in the form of a bat. I'm actually kind of surprised that these youth-sucking vampires, not blood-sucking, also turn into bats because the connection of vampires and bats is, of course, the real-life vampire bat that drinks blood. So without that connection, It's an interesting moment. And it's honestly not a bad looking fake bat for a Hammer movie. Now here's a scene I really like because it's very interesting, but it's also thematically rich for the characters. Unfortunately, a little bit before this, Marcus actually gets turned into a vampire. He grows fangs. Here's another thing. I don't know why these vampires have fangs if they're sucking out youth. Do they still need to puncture somebody to do it? I guess so, but whatever. Marcus is tragically a vampire, and now they decide, because Marcus desperately wants them to kill him, he wants to end this suffering, they decide to use him to experiment on what kills these types of vampires. And a stake doesn't work. By the way, they have really cool looking stakes. You can tell these guys are professional.
Vampire killer!
But a stake doesn't work, so they gotta find something else. And after some trial and error, they discover it's steel. Steel kills these vampires, which is convenient when your hero is a swashbuckler with a sword. But before he can fight the vampires, he gets attacked by an angry mob of townspeople who just assume that he murdered Marcus. And instead of trying to explain himself, clear his name, he just kills all these guys. Yeah, I mean, I get they're an angry mob trying to do maybe some mob justice, maybe just trying to arrest him, but I mean, you could at least try before just slaughtering all these guys. And the vampire slaughtering people too. I really like this attack sequence of these random people. I mean, the vampire looks so cool in the doorway. This corpse looks amazing. That's probably one of my favorite moments of gore, shall we say, gore in a Hammer movie. But to fight the vampires, which they have figured out has got to be these Derwood siblings, they decide to use Carla as bait, which she totally agrees to because again, she is good sport for all of this. She is into it. So pretending to be a runaway, she is welcomed into the Derwood's house to just sleep on the couch. And here's where I'm wondering if Paul Derwood is going to be tempted by Carla Monroe staying in his house. I mean, gosh, it's Carla Monroe. But no, he just goes upstairs. Oh, it's Sarah. Okay, that makes sense. Lesbian vampires. Very big in the 70s. But remember I said earlier that a good thing about them switching up the vampire formula in this movie is you actually get some unexpected things, some plot twists, and the end has a really good plot twist that the siblings are not vampires and it's actually the mother. She was wearing a mask the whole time, which seems incredibly obvious, but you might just assume that's just a bad Hammer special effect. It wouldn't be there first, but no, it actually fits into the story. It was a mask all along. And Wanda Ventham plays Lady Durward. Reportedly, Ingrid Pitt actually turned down this role, which makes sense because the minute I saw Lady Durward, I was like, well, this is like discount Ingrid Pitt, right? Yeah, it seems that's basically the case. And that's not even the only plot twist. The cloaked vampire was the father who they've been talking about as dead this whole time. And the siblings aren't even involved in any of this. They don't know about any of it. They're innocent besides being incestuous weirdos. And the mother says that she is a Costine by birth, which sounds really similar to Karnstein or Karnstein, which Hammer dedicated an entire trilogy to the Karnstein family of Carmilla Karnstein. So that seems like a reference there. Honestly, they should have just made her a Karnstein. Just include it in the Karnstein mythology. I think that'd be cool. And an interesting fact about him is this guy is just a stuntman who was brought in to choreograph the sword fight that's about to happen. But since the character didn't need much dialogue or acting, they just used him to play the father. And it worked out really well because as a result, we get a great sword fight with very little need for cutting around things, doubling in stuntmen, because Horst Jansen, he could sword fight. He does his own stunts. And then we get an actual sword fighting stuntman to do the other part. It's a great sword fight. And one of my favorite things to be in any movie is a sword fight. I love sword fighting on film. And the standard that I hold everything to is Errol Flynn and Basil Rathbone in The Adventures of Robin Hood. I think that's the greatest of all time. And comparatively, I mean, this holds up pretty well. This is a darn good sword fight. And it's a little bit messy. It's not just totally clean choreography. They're throwing each other around, kicking each other. It's good stuff. But of course, Kronos has to be victorious. He stabs this dude with steel. Remember, steel, that's the way to kill these vampires, which works out when you want to end with a sword fight. And Captain Kronos rides into the sunset without Carla. He leaves her behind. And right now I got to ask, why would you ever leave behind Carla Monroe? What is wrong with you? Who would do that? Apparently they did that because they anticipated there was going to be sequels and they wanted Captain Kronos to be like a James Bond with a different love interest in every movie. But especially considering that didn't happen anyway, like, Carla should be a consistent part of this trio. Like, don't leave her behind. You gotta take her. I don't care that you don't want to be tied down, Captain Kronos. It's Carla Monroe. You're lucky. Let's rate Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter. Now for atmosphere, I'm gonna give this a 6, and this is a big step up from what I used to think. On this new 4K, the atmosphere is so much better because it just looks absolutely gorgeous, like I've never seen it look before. And I do appreciate that it's kind of more a folk horror atmosphere than gothic, because a lot of it is in the woods, but still, it's nowhere near at the level of Hammer films like Brides of Dracula or Curse of the Werewolf, or most of the Terrence Fisher stuff, honestly, but pretty solid, a little better than average. For characters, I'm gonna go with an 8. I'm gonna be honest with you. I have never liked the character of Captain Kronos more than I did on this last watch. I've always been a little bit bothered by the dub, and I like dubbing in like Italian horror movies, Fulci movies, stuff like that, but this isn't that kind of movie. Like, nobody else is dubbed, to my knowledge. I don't think anybody else is dubbed. So it's just a little weird. It stands out, and I really wish they just let Horst Jansen use his own voice, but it is what it is. I still think he's a really cool character. The look is great. There's so many weird eccentricities about him. He's just a badass vampire hunter. Professor Gross is a great sidekick. I love their friendship. I love Carla. I even love Dr. Marcus. The villains aren't the best, especially since we don't really get to truly meet them until the end of the movie, but it's good enough. I just wish there was a sequel so we could have seen him fight some traditional vampires, but that's not this movie's fault. It's the people of the 1970s who didn't support this in theaters. It's your fault if any of you are watching. For story, I'm going to give this a 7. I appreciate that they did something different. I definitely appreciate that there's plot twists. Brian Clemens set out to make a very different kind of Hammer vampire film, and I love a Hammer vampire film. So like, I like a lot of those better, but for something different, he did a good job. And for the horror, for the scares, I'm going to give this a 7. I actually really like the cloaked vampire look. I like the decomposed bodies that you see, or the aging people. That's good stuff. The movie is certainly not scary, and that's the one thing that kind of validates Brian Clemens when he said it's not really a horror movie. It doesn't really feel like he's going for scares, but if you're a vampire fan, a Hammer horror fan, I think this is going to give you what you're looking for. So all in all, I'm going to give Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter a 7 out of 10. It has such great stuff to it. It's got some things that hold it back a little bit, but I think it's solid, and I've never enjoyed it more than I did this last time. Before I close this out, I want to give a huge thank you to my patrons. You guys are the best, and the reason I'm able to dedicate as much time into this channel as I do, with a special shout out to Cheryl Lynn Balder, Wilfred Pennington, and Joe Vanny. You guys rule. But that's my review. Let me know your thoughts of Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter down in the comments, and did you pick up the new 4K? Let's talk about it. And if you enjoyed this and you haven't yet, give a like and a subscribe. I'd certainly appreciate it. If you want to hang out with me more, you can click this video or this playlist right down here. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.